I'm Kristen Rattan. I'm with the Collaborative Knowledge Foundation, or COCO, as we're known to friends, and figure out how to turn this into presentation mode. There we go. Great. So Dan did an excellent job introducing sort of this overall notion of what today is about, the open source bazaar, and we've had a couple of other meetings like this to really introduce the notion that there is a growing ecosystem of projects that can work together and produce whole solutions, I think, to the point of the question. At COCO, we believe that there is no one single solution out there that's going to be the magic bullet. I think that's the way we all approached technologies back in the beginning, in the late 90s and early 2000s, when people would build a nice box and they'd say, here's your solution, and it was wrapped up and it looked like it would solve all your problems. And slowly over time, you realize it's not going to, that technology needs to be built in order to change. It has to evolve. And so there really isn't, it's not really easy or economical for any one box to try to then morph into all of the different things that the growing community needs. So, you know, we believe strongly that what we're doing is part of this larger ecosystem, and that we really need to think very broadly about what are all of the point solutions and all of the different connections to be able to create this, the evolving map of what we will need, not just today, but tomorrow. And that we should, because of that, be building in very modular and interoperable ways. That code should be thought of as something that can be reused by others. That it should be portable and granular, it should be well documented, and that the code base, if you think about it, the more you can break things down into their smallest, most useful part, the easier it is for somebody else to pick up and use that one thing. And that way, you don't have to ever sort of buy a box again. You can assemble things in the way that you want. And I get that that can be a little bit scary if you're not quite sure how to do that assembly part, and I feel that's a big challenge we need to meet, and I'll get to that. But if we really want an evolving solution, we have to begin with this ground-up rebuild in a much more modular and interoperable way. And also, we believe that the community should be responsible for creating its own solutions. And this is new as well. I think somebody can come along and hand you the box, but ultimately, if you want it to do what you want it to do, you have to contribute to the building and to the thinking through of what it is you're going to need today and tomorrow and in 5 years. And that technology has become far more accessible. We all understand it more. We have, even if you're not a technologist, you have some intuitive understanding of what works for you, what sort of interfaces work, what kind of tools might work. And we've spent a lot of time working directly with publishers who are using our technology, and it's been delightful to realize just how much inherent and intuitive technical knowledge people have developed over time, and people of all ages and in all sorts of jobs within a publishing organization, in editorial and in production, actually understand what they need from technology. And so it's a great time to be rethinking the entire process, and it's allowed people to rethink their own workflows, which has helped us to then define the technology that will meet those needs. So this ecosystem is represented in part by the folks here in this panel, but far more than that, it's really exciting to watch it emerge. And what I've seen happen is we've got some big kind of boulders in the room, some of these platforms and frameworks that can support a large implementation, and we have lots of tools, smaller solutions that fit into that and that can be picked up and used interoperably with some of these platform solutions. And I think this is a really exciting approach because it changes the notion from that box to something where I think of it in my own head more like Lego pieces, where you have a platform and you can then plunk in different solutions. And it also means that if one piece of that isn't working the way you want it to, you can swap it out for another one, or maybe somebody builds a new thing that'll fit. You can add that without re-architecting and re-engineering this box that you've otherwise been confined in. So it can feel a little confusing and it can feel a little overwhelming, but at the same time, it's an approach that can evolve, and we can hope for new tools and new frameworks to pop up, and we should all accept that that's a very, very good thing. So the other thing that was brought up in the question before is how does this get packaged up in a way that I can use it? And this is where services come in. And I think this is the next evolutionary step that we'll begin to see, which is service providers realizing that rather than having to rebuild their box over and over again, they can take advantage of this open source ecosystem and assemble solutions that meet the needs of their market. We were approached, for example, by a service provider in the Middle East that services, Arabic language journals. They have a niche market. Why should they go and rebuild something completely new and try just for that one market when they can actually create a service offering from open source? And they're not even competing with the major service providers that we tend to see at this conference. So I think that when you think about all of the different ways in which people are producing content, there is a huge market out there, and service providers can have a role in pulling together a lot of these open source solutions, picking best of breed, and then creating a service with all of the lovely SLAs and the customer support and all the things people expect. And it's a win-win all around because nobody's reinventing every single piece on this map. They're able to say, for once, we don't have to rebuild an access control system just to make the platform work. We don't have to reinvent reporting all over again. We can all use the same modules and contribute to those. And we have lots of things in our history at Scholarly Communications where we've done that. Crossref is a great example. We don't reinvent the DOI every time we think about how we're going to create an identifier for a document. Counter is another example. And so if we begin to think of some of these core technologies as those sort of public utilities, we then don't have to repave every road as we go. So at COCO, we've built this Pub Suite framework, which it embodies those ideas of very modular, interoperable pieces and parts. And it is a framework into which you can plug solutions for, manuscript submission and peer review and editing online and making decisions and producing content and producing PDFs and converting content from one thing to another. But we're not building every single piece and part of this. We're actually looking at the broader community who are building solutions and trying to incorporate those as much as possible and make them interoperable in this ecosystem. So we are definitely drinking our own Kool-Aid when it comes to the idea that all these things should be modular and interoperable, and the idea that we at COCO don't have all the good ideas. Lots of them are represented here and out there, and we should all be having those conversations. And to the point Dan made, sometimes we don't talk enough, and I'm really grateful that we're trying to talk more. But it's not, I think, because we haven't wanted to, it's because we're all small, scrappy, startup nonprofit organizations just trying to make it go. But it's really wonderful when we can begin to collaborate and put these things all on a map where they can be comprehensible to the industry. So some of the core ideas behind our technology is this idea that all of the collaboration that occurs between people in the publishing process should be done in the browser, not offline, not in walled gardens. We should just take advantage of the web and use it for everything it offers, and then only add what we need to as scholarly communication professionals. And that hasn't been the path we've taken in the past. The idea being that make sure that all content comes in and is usable in the browser in some structured format like HTML as early as possible in the workflow. So in the case of the platforms we're building in journals, this means converting Word documents primarily into HTML where they're highly clean and structured, where they can be worked on, and then converted to other formats like JATS or PDF or EPUB. Because while the content is in flux, it's useful to be able to rely on what the web has already done a good job of doing, which is managing HTML content. We also feel with that in place, you can then begin to automate some of the tasks that are currently being done fairly manually. And this idea of a very digital-first workflow also means you can be very flexible with how you manage your workflow. So we have a very linear way of thinking about publishing today, whether you're talking about journal production or book production. We tend to think very much like you have to go through every letter to get from A to Z. And I think having this more flexible workflow allows you people to collaborate real time, to spin off of each other, and to reimagine that workflow in hopefully a more efficient and cost-effective way. Our goal is to is to promote very rapid turnaround of content, very low cost, and improve the opportunities for human beings to actually work together in ways that could improve the content. So one of the, I'm not going to do a full demo, we don't have time, but just to indicate one of the tools we're working on is that editing tool where you can edit content directly in the browser. And the author view of this may feel very much like an authoring tool. The editor experience very much like a place where you look at that content side by side with tasks you have to do, like assigning reviewers or making a decision on the content. And then the reviewer experience is, again, the same. It's the same HTML content in the same browser, but the functions that the reviewer has are different. So what this is a single example of taking complex linear functions and putting them into a browser where people can actually see the work that's relevant to them, immediately act upon it, and then it can continue to sort of signal tasks to other people. But you're not passing this almost print-like object from person to person to person anymore. You're actually able to have things happening at the same time in a non-linear way. So again, it's trying to move things in a much more collaborative direction. Another key idea we have is that what we are producing, a journal article, a book chapter, or some other form of content, really has to evolve beyond print. And we haven't yet quite done that. I mean, we've got some links and things and stuff, but really we need to think about a more networked output where all of the pieces and parts that went into the work, the research itself, are also networked and available. And that means collecting the data sets and the code and all of the other goodies that are there. And if we are thinking in terms of using the web as a vehicle to produce content, it's far easier to think of these as a networked constellation of all of the related items. So I think we can do a better job and be the heroes in the industry if we start to think about how we can improve what we're publishing. As I said, we don't think there's a one-size-fits-all solution. There are many ways to mix and match the technologies that you'll hear about today and create all kinds of new things. What we've done is create this back end and then a series of components that can be mixed and matched to create book platform, journal platform, and we're also working on a micro-publishing platform. And so these are the three main use cases we're working on now. The books platform, Editoria, is ready. It's now in use by the University of California Press and soon California Digital Library, and a number of other publishers are really interested in adopting it. And it's essentially ebook production from the authoring point to the point at which it's able to be produced as an EPUB. And it embodies that kind of real-time collaboration around the content, et cetera. The journal platform, XPub, is more than halfway there. You'll hear a little about it from Dan Morgan, who's one of the, UCP is one of the publishers adopting that, also eLife. And that's, it's in development now and early testing. And then for micropublications, these are short, rapid communications. We're working with an organization out of Caltech called Wormbase. They're one of the model organism databases, and they want to produce short, rapid publications that would happen far earlier in the process than a journal article or a preprint. One final note is that we see all of this very much as community-led. We're responding to the needs of those who come to us and say, I have a problem and I want a solution. And that means that we feel that we're in a sort of hub place where the community is driving a lot of what we're developing, and we're able to shape that in a way that is sensible and work with early adopters. And many of our early adopters are contributing code, and some of them are contributing other things as well. Just a final note here that open source is sustainable. A lot of people will say, well, isn't it just free? Isn't it going to go away? Most of the things you use on the web are based currently now on open source. Everything from the governing protocols to 70% of the websites being based in WordPress. The open source is everywhere. You use it every single day, every time you use your credit card, every time you get on a website. And so if you're concerned about open source sort of being some fly-by-night thing, understand that it is in fact the air we breathe at this point. And then finally, this is the final one, I promise. I just want to get the idea across that because you're sharing all of this infrastructure in theory, it doesn't mean that you're losing your identity as a publisher. If you think about the stack that you live on, including all of those internet protocols and all of those things, as this sort of layers, there is a nice layer at the top that can always be your layer that you own. That's the place where you interact with your readers and your authors and your editors and your reviewers. That can look and feel entirely unique while sharing all the other layers underneath, all the heavy lifting, all the boring stuff. And this is a model that has worked well in other industries, and we see it more and more in high tech, where people are sharing open source infrastructure, and then they are differentiating themselves in the competitive space with a thin user experience layer at the top. And I think that's how, as an industry, we become more sustainable. And that's it. Thank you.
While Nathan gets set up, we have some questions for Justin.
Yes.
You mentioned micro publications. Is that, and I assume that's sort of like the publishing the single observation, perhaps. So in my university, we just partnered with Science Matters, which I think is maybe doing a similar thing. So do you see an emerging market for this type of publishing? Is that of interest to people?
I think there is more and more interest in this. And in fact, this concept is not new. PLOS launched PLOS Currents maybe, I don't know, what, 8, 10 years ago, something like that. And those were meant to be micro publications. Some are less micro than others. And I think PLOS was well ahead of its time. I am seeing more and more interest now. I think the preprint wave has kind of created a sense that, well, wait, if we can go with the preprint, if that's acceptable, let's go a little earlier and get that. Also, people I think are more aware that you can create portable pieces of, like, for example, code and data publications and things like that. So I hope there is an emerging market. I think it's a great concept.
A different end of the emerging market. So Pulp Suite, as you explained it, is a system for generating ebooks. Is there any thought of branching out so that these can also at least produce printer-ready PDFs for those of us who are still in print?
Absolutely. In fact, we are working with a project called Paged Media that my co-founder Adam Hyde started, which is all about automated typesetting and production. And it's using tools that can take that highly structured, clean HTML and turn it into print-ready PDFs. And it's actually well underway, and a lot of the tools that they're working on are pretty mature at this point. So it's called Paged Media, and I think it's pagedmedia.org is the website.
Great. I think, Judy, is it quick?
Yeah, I think so. Could you just say a couple of sentences about the use case for Wormbase?
Yeah, so Wormbase is a model organism database, and there are lots of others: Flybase, Zebrafishbase, Ratbase. Anyway, they are seeing their communities have indicated a desire to be able to publish very quick, rapid results as the research is evolving. And as their job is curating the research and the data, they feel like they're well positioned to provide another layer of curation for these early forms of publications related to the model organism databases. And one of the reasons I think it may be successful is because it's community-led. It's coming out of them. This isn't a top-down thing. It's organically bubbling up from the researchers with a desire to share their work.